In the dim light of his cramped apartment, Mark sat hunched over his laptop, scrolling through Craigslist. He was searching for a cheap used couch, his old one now just a pile of springs and fabric. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon an ad that seemed too good to be true: vintage couch, excellent condition, free. The only catch was the urgency in the post: must pick up tonight. Despite the oddity, the lure of a free couch was irresistible. Mark messaged the seller, who responded almost immediately with an address and a strict instruction: come alone and after midnight. It's the only time I'm available. The address was on the outskirts of town, a part of the city Mark was unfamiliar with, but the desire to replace his battered couch pushed his reservations aside. Armed with just his phone's flashlight, Mark arrived at the address close to 1 a.m. The building was an old, decrepit Victorian house, its windows dark and the garden wildly overgrown. The front door was ajar. As he pushed it open, it creaked loudly, echoing through the hollow halls of the house. "Hello?" Mark called out tentatively, his voice swallowed by the silence. There was no reply. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The house was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from his flashlight and the moon peeking through the broken windows. Mark found the living room, where the couch was supposed to be. Instead of a couch, there was just an old camcorder on the floor, pointing towards a chair in the center of the room. Curiosity overcame his initial hesitance, and Mark approached the camcorder. It was still on, its red recording light blinking. A chill ran down his spine as he played back the last recording. The screen lit up to show a figure tied to the chair, struggling, their muffled screams just audible over a static background noise. Mark's heart raced as he realized the gravity of what he was seeing. He turned to leave, but as he did, the floor creaked loudly behind him. Frozen, he slowly turned the flashlight towards the sound, revealing nothing but the empty, dark corridor. The air felt colder, heavier. As he took a step back towards the door, he heard it, a whisper, barely audible, coming from the basement. The whisper turned into a call, a voice eerily similar to his own, beckoning him. Against his better judgment, curiosity pulled him towards the basement door, his hand shaking as it reached for the handle. And then, the screen of his phone flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. In the suffocating darkness, Mark's breath quickened. His phone, his lifeline, was now dead, leaving him in complete blackness. He stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest, debating whether to flee the house or to discover the source of the beckoning voice that mimicked his own. The pull was inexplicably strong, almost magnetic. With tentative steps, he descended into the basement, each creak of the stair under his weight sounding like a thunderclap in the silent house. The air grew colder as he reached the basement floor, the smell of damp and decay filling his nostrils. He fumbled along the wall, his fingers brushing against a cold switch. With a flick, the basement was bathed in a dull, flickering light. The room was cluttered with old furniture, covered in dust sheets, and in the center, a circle of salt surrounded an ancient-looking book open on a small pedestal. Mark's eyes were drawn to the book, its pages yellowed and edges worn. As he stepped closer, he could see that it was filled with strange symbols and writings in a language he didn't recognize. The air around him felt charged, electric. The voice called again, louder this time, a clear whisper in his ear, "Come closer." He was about to step into the circle when he noticed the walls. They were covered in photographs, all pinned haphazardly across the concrete. As he examined them with the flickering light casting unsettling shadows, he realized with a sinking feeling that they were all of people, their eyes crossed out with red marker. Some photos looked old, faded by time, while others were disturbingly recent. Suddenly, a sound snapped him out of his horrified trance, a soft thud coming from behind a large cabinet. As he edged closer, the cabinet slowly moved forward on its own, revealing a hidden door slightly ajar. The same inexplicable force that had guided him to the basement compelled him to open it. Beyond lay a narrow tunnel, crudely dug out, disappearing into darkness. The air flowing from the tunnel carried a mix of earth and something foul he couldn't quite place. With the light from the basement growing dimmer behind him, Mark ventured into the tunnel. His hands grazed the damp earth walls, the path narrowing as he moved deeper. The whisper became a chorus, multiple voices now echoing around him, some crying for help, others laughing menacingly. The ground beneath him became increasingly uneven, and he stumbled over something soft on the floor. A quick look down revealed a shoe, a child's shoe, worn and muddy. Panic set in, but the tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly, the voices growing louder, urging him forward. He couldn't tell how long he'd been walking when he finally saw a faint light ahead. It flickered like candlelight, dancing shadows across the rough tunnel walls. As he approached, the ground leveled out into a small cavern. Candles lit the space, and in the center, a figure stood with its back to him, its head tilted in an unnatural angle as if listening to the walls. Mark halted, breath caught in his throat, as the figure slowly began to turn towards him. As the figure turned, the candlelight revealed its features, disturbingly familiar, yet grotesquely distorted. It was as if Mark was looking into a funhouse mirror, the reflection twisted in a nightmarish way. The figure's eyes, deep and hollow, locked onto Mark's with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. A smile, too wide to be natural, spread across the figure's face. "Welcome," it spoke, its voice a distorted echo of Mark's own. "You've finally arrived." Mark tried to speak, to ask where he was and what was happening, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure moved closer, each step deliberate, the sound echoing around the cavern walls. "You don't remember, do you?" the figure continued, tilting its head as if puzzled by Mark's confusion. "You've been here before, long ago. You left something behind, and now you've come back for it." Panic surged through Mark, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but his body wouldn't comply. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers elongated and skeletal. It pointed to a corner of the cavern where a small, rusted metal box sat atop a pedestal. The box was ornate, covered in the same strange symbols that were in the book upstairs. "You must open it," the figure urged. "Only then will you understand." Reluctantly, drawn by a force he couldn't resist, Mark moved towards the box. As he lifted the lid, a surge of energy swept through the cavern, extinguishing the candles and plunging the space into darkness. A series of whispers filled the air, growing louder, more urgent. Mark's hands trembled as they reached into the box, pulling out an object wrapped in a black, velvet cloth. The whispers crescendoed to shouts, and just as suddenly, silence fell. Mark unwrapped the object. It was a mirror, old and tarnished, its surface cloudy. He peered into it, and the reflection staring back at him was not his own. It shifted, changing, showing him visions of events he couldn't remember, faces of people he felt he should know. Each image flickered past, faster and faster, until one face stayed longer than the rest, a woman, her expression sorrowful, her eyes pleading. The ground beneath him began to tremble, small stones and dust falling from the ceiling of the cavern. A deep rumbling sounded from the depths of the tunnel, growing louder, as if something large was approaching. Mark turned towards the sound, the mirror still clutched in his hand. His heart raced as shadows began to move along the walls, taking form, converging towards the cavern from the tunnel. The figure that had resembled him now stood by the entrance of the cavern, watching silently as the shadows grew closer, their forms more distinct. Mark could see now that they were people, or what once had been people, their features ghastly, their eyes empty. They moved with purpose, surrounding him, reaching out with their cold, lifeless hands. The earth shook more violently, the rumbling sound almost deafening, as if the very foundation of the house above was about to collapse into the abyss below. Amid the deafening rumble and the pressing darkness, the spectral figures circled tighter around Mark. Their faces, twisted with anguish and despair, flickered in the dim light emanating from the tarnished mirror in his hand. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, intensifying as the cavern seemed to contract with every shake of the ground. The figure resembling Mark, still standing by the cavern entrance, began to chant in a language that twisted the air, warping it with a palpable sense of dread. The words were unfamiliar, ancient-sounding, resonating through Mark's very bones. As the chant grew louder, the spectral figures began to sway, their movements synchronized and increasingly fervent. "Join us," they whispered in unison, their voices a haunting melody that seemed to pull at the edges of Mark's mind. "Complete the circle, return what was lost." In the center of the cavern, the ground cracked open, revealing a glowing fissure that cast a sickly green light across the walls. The mirror in Mark's hand pulsed as if in response, its surface rippling like water touched by wind. Images flashed faster across it, showing scenes of rituals and sacrifices, echoes of past horrors that had occurred in this very spot. Driven by an unknown force, Mark stepped toward the fissure, the mirror outstretched in his hands. The spectral figures halted their swaying and watched, their eyes glowing faintly with that same eerie light. As he approached the edge, the figure that mirrored him spoke once more, its voice calm yet commanding. "Through this gate, the past and present merge. What was fragmented will be whole. What was lost can be found. Step forward, Mark. Embrace your destiny." With each word, Mark felt a pull towards the fissure, a magnetic draw that threatened to consume his very essence. The earth trembled underfoot, a stark reminder of the power held within this ancient place. He stood at the brink, the mirror now vibrating with energy, the faces within it crying out silently. Suddenly, the cavern was filled with the sound of cracking stone. The walls began to crumble, sending shards of rock tumbling down around them. The spectral figures moved closer, forming a protective ring around Mark. They extended their hands toward him, their touch cold but oddly comforting. As Mark looked into the mirror once more, he saw the woman's face again, her expression changing from sorrow to hope. She mouthed a single word, "Free us," before her image shattered, the mirror's surface breaking into a spiderweb of cracks. The fissure widened, a blinding light spilling forth, engulfing everything. Mark felt himself being lifted off his feet, the spectral hands holding him aloft. Above, the crumbling ceiling opened to the night sky, revealing the full moon, its light casting a silver glow over the chaotic scene. The shadows at the edges of the cavern grew denser, forming into new figures, each emerging with deliberate slowness. They were different from the spectral figures, these were solid, more human in appearance, their eyes clear and focused. They stepped into the light, their faces determined, as if they had been waiting for this moment for centuries. As the moon reached its zenith, the ground settled, and the rumbling ceased. Silence enveloped the cavern, broken only by the soft, rhythmic chanting of the newly arrived figures. Mark, still suspended in air, watched as the realities of past and present blurred, the boundary between them fading until it was as if time itself had folded, weaving the tapestry of fate anew. The mirror, despite its cracks, began to glow once more, its light steady and piercing, a beacon in the dark uncertainty of the cavern. As the cavern settled into an eerie calm, the air thick with the power of the ancient rites now rekindled, the newly arrived figures approached Mark. They were robed in garments that shimmered with the ethereal light, their faces serene yet marked by the weight of untold stories. The leader, a tall figure with piercing eyes, stepped forward, extending a hand toward the fragmented mirror Mark still clutched. "Give it to us," he said, his voice resonating with a gravity that seemed to echo the very depths of the earth. "It is the key, the final piece to mend the broken paths between worlds." Reluctantly, Mark handed over the mirror, its surface still radiating a soft, pulsing light. The leader took it with reverence, his fingers tracing the spiderweb cracks. He turned to the circle of figures and began a chant, their voices joining his in a harmony that vibrated through the cavern, filling the space with a pulsating energy. As they chanted, the figures formed a circle around the fissure, the mirror held aloft in the center. The light from the fissure grew stronger, its glow intense and all-consuming. Mark, still held by the spectral hands, felt a rush of wind as the energy in the room surged, the boundaries of the cavern seeming to expand and contract like the breath of some great beast. The chanting increased in intensity, the words now clearly invoking names and places long forgotten by time. The figures' shadows danced on the walls, merging with the images of the spectral entities that had first guided Mark here. The air crackled with energy, a storm of power that centered on the mirror, which began to levitate, spinning slowly as it rose above the fissure. Suddenly, the mirror stopped spinning, aligning perfectly with the moonlight that streamed through the open ceiling. A beam of silver light struck the mirror, reflecting into the fissure. The ground shook lightly, a gentle tremor as if the earth itself acknowledged the significance of the moment. From the depths of the fissure, a new light began to emerge, golden and warm, contrasting the cold silver of the moonlight. It swirled around the mirror, the light intertwining in an intricate dance of shadows and brightness. The spectral figures released Mark, who found himself drawn towards the circle, his feet moving of their own accord. As he stepped into the circle, the golden light enveloped him, the sensations of warmth and cold battling across his skin. The faces of the robed figures blurred, their features shifting rapidly as if cycling through countless lifetimes in mere seconds. The leader's voice rose above the others, clear and commanding. "Behold, the veil is thinning. The paths are aligning. Mark, you are the conduit through which the past will speak to the future. Witness the unification." The energy peaked, a brilliant flash of light consuming the cavern, blinding Mark temporarily. As his vision cleared, he saw that the figures and the spectral entities were converging, their forms merging into singular entities of light and shadow. The fissure's glow stabilized into a clear, steady beacon, projecting images into the air above it, scenes of ancient rituals, battles fought over the very energies now being harnessed, and quiet moments of peace among peoples of a forgotten era. The cavern now seemed larger, the walls covered in frescoes that depicted the history of the place, alive with moving images like living memories. Mark felt a profound connection, as if the history of this hidden place was downloading directly into his consciousness. Just as he was beginning to comprehend his role in this ancient tableau, a new disruption occurred. A rumbling, louder than any before, sounded from the depths of the tunnel. Dust and small stones fell from the newly formed ceiling as a figure, unlike any seen before, began to emerge from the shadows. This figure was clad in armor, its eyes burning with a fierce light, and its presence commanded attention. It walked steadily towards Mark, its purpose clear and its arrival marking the next chapter in this unfolding mystery. As the armored figure approached, the air grew tense, the previously harmonious atmosphere shifting into one of impending conflict. The figure's armor clinked with each deliberate step, resonating with an ancient power, the light from its eyes casting stark shadows across the cavern walls. Despite the foreboding aura, the figure halted before reaching the circle, standing just on its edge, as if respecting an invisible boundary. The leader of the robed figures stepped forward, his expression solemn but unafraid. "Who dares interrupt this sacred convergence?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "I am not here to interrupt, but to fulfill," the armored figure responded, its voice deep and resonating, as if it carried the weight of centuries. "I am the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of balance between the realms. You seek to unify the past with the present, but know this imbalance must be maintained." Mark watched, fascinated and fearful, as a dialogue unfolded between the past and the possible future. The Guardian's presence suggested that their actions were part of a larger cosmic scale, one that required careful handling to avoid disastrous consequences. The Guardian raised a gauntlet hand, and from its palm emanated a light similar to that emerging from the fissure, but darker, tinged with shades of blue and gray. This light represents the memories and energies that must not be forgotten or lost in your unification. They are the shadows to your light, the silence to your song. The leader nodded, understanding the gravity of the Guardian's words. He turned to his assembly, signaling them to prepare for another phase of their ritual. "We acknowledge the need for balance. Will you guide us, Guardian, to ensure that both light and shadow are represented?" The Guardian stepped into the circle, the energy shifting to accommodate this new force. "I will guide you, but know this, the path may lead to places both wondrous and terrifying. The realms are vast, and their secrets are guarded fiercely." As the Guardian joined the ritual, the spectral figures and the robed figures began to chant once more, their voices a blend of melancholy and hope. Mark felt the energy around him swell, a storm of light and shadow swirling in the center of the circle, enveloping the mirror, the Guardian, and the leader. The images projected by the fissure became more intense, displaying scenes of ancient alliances and betrayals, great loves and devastating losses. Mark felt as if he was not merely witnessing these events but experiencing them, the emotions washing over him with overwhelming power. Suddenly, the cavern shook violently, a sign that the energies being summoned were perhaps too powerful, too unstable. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, and the ceiling groaned under the strain. Amidst the chaos, Mark heard a new voice, soft yet clear, cutting through the tumult. "Do not fear the power you awaken. Embrace it, but with wisdom," the voice advised. Turning towards the sound, Mark saw a new figure emerging from the shadows, neither spectral nor robed, but cloaked in a shimmering veil of light, almost ethereal in its form. This figure approached him directly, its eyes locking onto his with an intensity that seemed to see through to his very soul. "This is your journey as much as ours, Mark. You are the bridge between what was and what may yet be, the figure spoke directly to him, handing him a small, luminescent stone. Keep this as a token of what lies ahead. The paths are many, and you will choose the one you walk. As the figure retreated, the energies calmed slightly, the fissure's light stabilizing into a steady glow. The figures around Mark resumed their ritual, now with a new sense of urgency but also with greater control, their movements precise and their chants resonant. The convergence was nearing its peak, the circle complete with the presence of light, shadow, and the myriad forces represented by those gathered. The future, however perilous, beckoned with a promise of revelation and transformation. The cavern, now alive with ancient magic and the palpable pulse of destiny, seemed to wait, breathless, for the next chapter to unfold. As the ritual in the cavern reached its zenith, the swirling energies of light and shadow merged into a blinding vortex, pulling at the very fabric of reality. Mark, still clutching the luminescent stone, felt its weight as a grounding force amidst the chaos. The guardian of the threshold, now fully integrated into the circle, directed the flow of energies with authoritative gestures, his armor glowing with runes that flared in response to the ritual's power. The ceiling of the cavern creaked ominously, small fissures spreading like webbing across the stone. Dust and small debris fell like soft rain, a physical reminder of the dangerous power they were harnessing. The robed figures, their faces etched with concentration, continued their incantations, their voices blending into a single, haunting melody that seemed to pierce through the dimensions. Suddenly, the ethereal figure that had given Mark the stone stepped forward, raising its hands. The air around it shimmered with a silver light, and it spoke in a voice that resonated deeply, not just in the cavern but in Mark's soul. Now, Mark. Now you must accept your role, not just as a witness but as a keyholder of fate. Compelled by the command, Mark stepped forward, approaching the center of the vortex. The stone in his hand began to pulsate with a fierce light, its energy resonating with the ritual's power. He raised the stone above his head, and as he did, the images flashing through the vortex stilled, focusing on a single, stark vision, a gate, ancient and formidable, standing amidst a storm-racked landscape. This is the Gate of Shadows, the guardian intoned, the threshold between worlds. Through this gate, the lost energies can be balanced, but beware, what passes through can never return unchanged. Mark felt the truth of these words like a chill down his spine. The spectral figures around him nodded in solemn agreement, their faces grim yet hopeful. With a deep breath, Mark stepped into the vortex, the stone leading the way. As he did, the gate in the vision swung open, revealing a realm of swirling mists and echoing voices. The ground trembled underfoot, and the cavern seemed to expand, accommodating the enormous energy being summoned. The gate drew closer in the vision, becoming a palpable presence in the room. Mark walked towards it, each step resonant with purpose. As he crossed the threshold, a surge of energy, so powerful it was almost physical, swept through the cavern. The gate shimmered and then, with a resounding boom, slammed shut. Silence fell. The vortex dissipated, leaving behind a calm that was both eerie and profound. The guardian, the robed figures, and the spectral entities stared at the spot where Mark had vanished, their faces a mixture of awe and sorrow. "He has gone to restore the balance," the guardian finally said, his voice echoing in the now still air. "He has taken on the mantle of keeper, guardian of the Gate of Shadows. His sacrifice will not be forgotten." The robed figures bowed their heads, a gesture of respect and mourning for the one who had walked willingly into the unknown. The ethereal figure who had guided Mark touched the spot where he had last stood, and a soft light bloomed there, a lasting memorial. As the figures began to dissipate, returning to the realms from whence they came, the cavern began to close, the cracks mending themselves as if being stitched by invisible hands. The guardian remained a moment longer, looking at the sealed gate. "Balance has been restored, for now," he murmured. "But the worlds are ever-changing, ever-shifting. The gate will open again, and who knows what keeper will be called then." With those final words, he too vanished, leaving the cavern sealed and silent, a sacred site once again hidden from the uninitiated, holding its breath for the next chapter in its ancient, ongoing story.